Building Privacy Foundations Today for Tomorrow's Tech. My name is Caitlin Fennessy, and I am the Research Director at the International Association of Privacy Professionals, the IAPP. And I'm going to turn to my fellow co-panelists to introduce themselves, just give you their name and organization. I think their bios are in your program, so we'll do quick intros.
Great, thank you. I'm Naomi Lefkowitz. I'm Senior Privacy Policy Advisor at the National Institute of Technology and Standards, and that is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce.
I'm Kim Watts. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Distrinet Research Group, which is part of the Department of Computer Science at KU Leuven here in Belgium.
I'm Massimo Torresi. I work for the European Data Protection Supervisor as an IT Security and Technology Officer, and I also wear currently also the Data Protection Officer hat of the DPA.
Hi, I'm Jade Nestor. I'm Director of Consumer Policy at the GSMA in London.
I'm Stan Adams. I'm a Policy Counsel at the Center for Democracy and Technology based in DC.
Thank you all so much. I'm honored to be able to moderate such a distinguished group here. And I understand that folks will continue to kind of filter in. I think there may have been a little bit of a delay upstairs, so just preparing you for that. So what we're going to do this morning is do more or less a moderated question and answer session for the first 45 minutes of our time here. I'll pose a number of questions to our panelists. Please be thinking of questions yourselves. We will save the last full 30 minutes for your questions. So I hope that you will have a lot to share with us. And we have put up just a resource slide for you. So these are some of the areas that we will touch on during our discussion today. So please feel free to visit. So I just want to kick us off here, start with a question for Naomi. First off, though, I want to pass along a huge congratulations to you and your colleagues. I don't know if everyone in the room is aware, but version 1.0 of NIST's new privacy framework is now out. A huge accomplishment. You can see the link up on our slide to access that. So congrats, and can you bring us up to speed on the framework and how it enables privacy engineering?
Great, thank you. And thank you for the congratulations. It's been a great process. I was here a couple years ago talking about the privacy engineering work that we'd been doing at NIST and some of the privacy risk management work and some of the concepts that we've been working on. And I think we've really been able to leverage that with this privacy framework. How many people are familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework? Great. So that's terrific. So actually in the summer of 2018, we had interest from industry and the administration, essentially, and given the regulatory environment with privacy, GDPR, and if you're familiar with California laws, and many major privacy incidents in the news, and people wanted to know whether we could do for privacy what we did with this cybersecurity framework, and so we put we went into a year-long process. We worked with stakeholders both in the public and private sectors, many public workshops, and really we started with a blank piece of paper. But we pretty quickly heard that people wanted us to align what we were doing with the NIST cybersecurity framework, and so last Thursday we were able to release version 1.0, and we call it version 1.0 because we do think of it as a living document that we will continue to update to meet stakeholders' needs, but this is our current stable version. And so, as I said, it's very much aligned with the structure of the cybersecurity framework. So both in terms of sort of the structure as well as the characteristics that we're trying to achieve. And so we really see it as sort of this increasingly granular set of privacy-related, privacy protection activities and outcomes that can be used to communicate for an organization from the executive level down to the implementation level, and then also, among organizations within what we've called the data processing ecosystem. So in the cybersecurity framework, you'd sort of see that as supply chain, but interestingly, that term didn't resonate with stakeholders as much. We really see that it's very important to understand that this is a voluntary tool, and so the work with stakeholders was, driven by, meeting their needs, so that it would, be a tool that they could pick up and use. So, we see this as a way for organizations to better identify and prioritize and manage privacy risk. And that was a big area of discussion over the year. What is privacy risk? What is privacy risk management? And as I said, that is where we leveraged some of the work that we'd already done, because when we asked very early on in public comments, how do you identify privacy risk? How do you manage it? I'd say the only consistent answer we got back was nothing consistent, right? So it's different from cybersecurity, where you can ask, what's cybersecurity risk, and everybody's going to give you a pretty similar answer. And so we focused on the work that we had been doing in terms of looking at privacy risk as really centering around the individual, and the kinds of problems that they can experience from data processing, whether that's collection through disposal. And by problems, we mean anything from embarrassment to discrimination, loss of self-determination, any range of problems that you could name. So we really focus on, how do you identify and prioritize and assess that kind of risk, and then, what are the kinds of policies and capabilities that you need. And we see this as, different, related but different from compliance risk. That is, and the way we sort of think about that is, if you as an organization do something that upsets your customers from a privacy standpoint, and then you tell them, well, I've done everything correct under the law, will they be any more satisfied? Probably not, right? That's privacy risk in a nutshell. And so really we see this framework as first and foremost trying to build that customer trust through more ethical decision-making to both optimize beneficial uses of data but minimize adverse consequences for people. That said, we do think that this can, this framework can support compliance activities insofar as we really see this as creating almost like the building blocks for meeting legal requirements. So you will see in it sort of, both activities related to developing policies around data processing, whether that be conditions on use or data retention, as well as sort of the capabilities that you actually need. So for example, if you have a legal requirement to, take data deletion requests from individuals, then you'll see in there capabilities around whether you can actually, access data for deletion. So, right, if you can't go in and find and extract data, then you're going to have a hard time actually meeting your legal requirements. So we see this both, as a way to build consumer trust in products and services, but also a way to communicate and demonstrate the kinds of activities that you're doing to meet your legal requirements. That said, our next steps really are about sort of building more guidance. I mean, we heard that very clearly in our last round of public comments. People wanted more guidance on both on privacy risk management and privacy risk assessment, but also, how do you do these activities, right? And so we have launched a online repository where we really are encouraging the community to submit contributions, whether those be crosswalks between standards or laws or just best practices or tools about how do you achieve particular outcomes or activities. And hopefully together we can continue to advance this field and address our tech of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as we watch legislative activity in the U.S. Congress related to federal legislation, I think it's all the more remarkable that NIST was able to accomplish this and roll it out so quickly, and also all the more useful for organizations to have this federal level framework. So being that we are in the EU, but also just in general, I want to turn now to Massimo and ask about some of the parallels you might see. You've now lived with the GDPR for a year and a half, and wonder how you look at the NIST Privacy Framework in light of your experience with GDPR, and whether you are seeing parallels or areas of convergence. And actually, let me just note that I'll pose some questions to specific folks, but if anyone wants to jump in afterwards, I'll kind of open it up after that, please.
Thank you, Kathleen, for the question. There is a reason for that, and then you will discover in a while. And let me, first of all, thank Naomi and NIST for the invitation to this panel. We have been collaborating now for some years with them, and the collaboration materialized in a Leuven, let's say, workshop that we held 2 years ago, half, I would say, organized by the Future of Privacy Forum, together with Carnegie Mellon and the KU Leuven and the EDPS IPEN initiative. The idea was to lay bridges between the two different conceptions of privacy through practical, privacy engineering proposals, frameworks, and to find commonalities among them. And I have to say that we have been following with a lot of interest your initiatives, also starting with the privacy engineering program and now with the newborn privacy framework. And that's not a secret to say that Naomi also kindly asked us a bit to have a look at the framework and to see how it, to find what they call these crosswalks between the framework and other kinds of, the NIST one and other frameworks or other normative references, could be laws or then similar approaches. So we started doing that. So it's just a new activity, but I would like to give a first considerations, some high-level considerations. And I will use some notes for that in order to be precise on what I want to say. And let's say that we consider the GDPR looking at three pillars of it, in particular the accountability provision, data protection by design, by default, and also the risk-based approach that goes along all the GDPR. So let's say, first of all, I would say that the NIST framework is, first of all, an accountability tool. So we have Article 5.2, which pinpoints all the other implementation, all the other, let's say, data protection principles. And it is clear that for the controller to implement the necessary technical and, organizational measures, I cannot see but necessary to have a sort of strategy and framework in place that could be, of course, flexible depending on the situation, but it should be there. And, as you say, compliance is just one aspect, and that's very good in the sense that then it can integrate also, as you invite to do also, ethics and sustainability considerations from companies. And by the way, let me say that we also at the DPS used a sort of accountability framework in order to transit from the old regulation to our new regulation, which is a bit specific, a mirror of the GDPR. And we used some elements that we customized, and we will certainly in the revision of that also we'll use also references and consider references to the NIST framework. Second, data protection by design and by default. We believe that all your privacy initiatives, I'm talking about the engineering program, the risk management approach, and the framework as a whole are a critical element to have something like that is a critical element for a successful implementation of data protection by design by default. And we also have something like this. In March 2018, we issued guidance for all EU institutions and bodies, and they are called Guidelines on IT Governance and Management. And we give, a sort of 26 recommendations, which are a bit, it's not a structured approach as yours. It goes a bit across the levels of abstractions, I would say, and outlines the role of senior management, defines structured processes, procedures, and includes, for example, the appointing responsible staff with a mandate to support, let's say, direction policies, to give resources to the people in order to implement those policies. And also, we also tackle the idea of the IT development operations life cycle for IT systems as you do for the risk management approach. And another thing that I saw in the framework is also the idea of tackling the overall ecosystems, which is not just the organization, but suppliers of the organization or customers of the organization. That's very important. We give a lot of importance to that. Article 28 mandates certain precise conditions in the contract, for example, for the contractor called processors for us. And I see that this is absolutely privacy by design by default cannot be there if you don't have an ecosystem which gets also the right products and services from the suppliers. And the third and last element is the management, of data protection risks. And this is central in the GDPR because Article 24 that mandates for the obligations for controllers obliges everybody to perform a risk assessment. I mean, an assessment of the risk for the individuals, for the data subjects. So I would say that's, it's not just the DPIA obligation, which is just there under certain conditions, when the risk is high, but it's in all cases. So it could then is scalable, of course, the risk assessment, but it's there. And we see that absolutely that's a central role in the NIST framework. I also appreciated the idea of clearly identify the so-called problematic data action for the individuals, which is clearly distinguished from the IT security risks, and that's very important. On the other hand, it's nice that it integrates, but I think it is clear, sufficiently clear in the framework that that's a different types of risks. And despite it is clear that this risk for individual is not the risk for the organization, I like the fact that you match and map the risk to individuals as also consequences for the organization. It could be reputation, it could be incompliances, and that's, sorry to sort of show up, give an epiphany of your strategy is a good selling point, I would say, for management, for the organization, of all kinds of organizations, including public bodies, because that's it. I mean, that's normal. And yeah, that's it, I think.
Thank you. I think you do a better job explaining it than
I hope it
do.
helps
That was
also
fantastic.
replying the question.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to chime in on behalf of kind of all the privacy professionals that IAPP represents and say that some kind of a crosswalk would be immensely useful. Massimo, you mentioned looking at a crosswalk between GDPR and the privacy framework. I know that would be of interest to a lot of folks, and wonder if that's something that you all are looking at or considering submitting to the repository that Naomi mentioned. Putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
You
of course, you have to,
that.
the levels are slightly different.
Yeah.
Because you are matching a framework, which is, as I say, an accountability framework with a set of provisions, even though it's not just a set of final provisions, what you have as subcategories or outcome in the, so the idea is not just match the GDPR, but match a bit, the spirit behind and how the GDPR should be implemented. So you see it. Otherwise, you are matching two different things. Two different, one is a normative reference, the other one is a general framework. But we will do it as an sort of extended comparison. Yeah.
It's very helpful. Does anyone else want to share thoughts on that comparison and the intersections with GDPR before we move to other questions? Okay. Well, with that, let me turn to you, Kim. Staying in the EU for the moment, your research has focused on developing practical tools much like the NIST framework is designed to do, to help organizations implement privacy by design and in particular undertake threat modeling. Can you tell us a little bit about that work, but also where you see or perhaps don't see intersections with the NIST framework? And I know you actually shared a slide, so let me pull that up for some background.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. So let me first start with explaining a bit about my research domain and our work on linden privacy threat modeling, and then let me get back to aligning it with NIST. So I'm focusing on privacy threat modeling. We've created Linden, which was inspired by Stride. Stride is the security threat modeling approach created by Microsoft about 20 years ago now. And it inspired us to create something similar for privacy. So what it does from a really high level explanation is that it provides systematic support to elicit, so to identify and to mitigate privacy threats for software architectures. In addition to providing a process to doing this systematically, it also provides knowledge support. In the context of the 7 categories that are encompassed within the Linden acronym. So they are shown here. It's linkability, identifiability, non-repudiation, and so on. Very high level, what is threat modeling? I think Adam Shostak summarizes it quite nicely into 4 questions. So before you can think about what goes wrong, you need to know what you're working on. So you need to have a model, a representation of the system, of the architecture you're working on. That way you can systematically go over all the different components, the different elements of that model, and then identify for each of those what can go wrong using the knowledge Linden provides structured according to the 7 categories. And then, of course, it's great to know what can go wrong, but of course you also want to assess how much a problem it is. So you want to assess the risk, and then you want to mitigate, you want to resolve the problems. I will not go into the details. I refer to you to our website, linden.org, where everything is publicly available. Linden has been around for about 10 years now, and we have been continuously working on improving and extending the framework. One of the main research areas we're working on now relates to making it more lightweight. Threat modeling in general, Linden, Stride, so on, rely very much on human assessment. So it's still quite labor intensive. It requires a lot of time. In addition, you need sufficient security or privacy knowledge to get you started. The learning curve can be considered quite steep. So there are different ways into looking into resolving that. One of the areas we're looking into is tooling to create more extensive models that allow to automatically or semi-automatically extract threats or risks from that model. If you're interested in that, my colleague Laurens is working on that. He's here now, so I'm happy to introduce you to him during a break. What I want to talk to you today about is the different angle we're working on. For people who really want to get their hands dirty and get started with Linden, we have created, and it's just launched this week, we have created Linden Go. It's basically a quick start to privacy threat modeling. It comes as a card tech, but it's also publicly available on the website. What does it consist of? We have a whole range of threat cards. They describe common privacy threat types, common problems that will help you determine whether they are applicable for your system. The kit also comes with a set of instructions. We recommend to use a collaborative approach, so to get different stakeholders together and really jointly think about what can go wrong. We also include some more general information, background information, some more information about the different categories of linden. It's not something completely different. It still contains the core of linden. It still contains the systematicity of threat modeling. It is a simplified method. We also reduce the threat scope, and we have optimized the privacy knowledge documentation as well as updated some of the contents. So it's freely available online. I also have some card text with me. If you would be interested, come talk to me later. What is important is that this was created driven by industry demand. So we got a lot of questions saying we really like linden, but we sometimes struggle really getting started with it. So we really are looking for feedback on this. So please visit our website. There's a questionnaire that you can fill out. When you get a box, there's also a QR code in it. We're really looking forward to getting your feedback or via mail. So that kind of very briefly summarizes linden and what we are working on. How does it align to NIST? Well, I think the overall goals are the same. Both linden and the NIST framework aim at supporting at providing support to improve privacy and risk assessment. The focus is a bit different in the sense that the NIST framework provides support for the overall organization and then zooms into different categories that can be further implemented. Linden is a tool, a technique that can fit within one of those categories of the framework, very specifically focusing on identifying privacy threats, privacy risks for a software architecture. So one of the techniques for a risk assessment. Maybe also worth mentioning, so there are 3 NIST objectives for privacy, and they also kind of nicely align with our linden categories. So you have the disassociability, which relates to our linkability and identifiability, and also the, I have to cheat now, predictability and manageability relate closely to our new unawareness cards in Linden Go. So also content-wise, I think the general concepts nicely align. So I'm really happy to see this overall framework to push people. Well, I know it's voluntarily, but to give them a means to really integrate it within their organization and to put more attention on privacy.
Thank you so much, Kim. I've heard you and your colleagues present on this before, but I feel like that helped improve even my understanding of this. And I kind of want to pose the same question that I put Massimo on the spot for. Is this something that you envision kind of mapping in any way to the NIST framework or submitting to their repository?
Yes. We have been talking behind the scenes to see how we can align. So I definitely want to continue doing that and trying to find like the right spot on how to integrate and put it on the repository. Certainly, yeah.
Wonderful. And yeah, I see so many parallels in terms of helping further the conversation, which I know has been a prime goal of NIST. And actually, just a quick anecdote, at the IEPP, privacy professionals reach out with all kinds of random questions to us all the time. And one I've been getting recently is, what can we do for a privacy activity, a privacy engineering activity for Data Protection Day coming up later this month? So maybe your cards or the NIST framework provide a rubric to have some of those conversations or games around that.
Great.
Does anyone else have anything you want to jump in on there? Otherwise, all right. Well, let me turn to you, Jade, as well, kind of sticking with the operational focus and how industry is thinking about operationalizing privacy engineering and privacy by design. I know that GSMA recently put out a smart privacy report that embraces a lot of the same types of measures that NIST is looking at. Can you share a little bit of details around that, and also just share your thoughts on how industry is looking to operationalize some of these privacy engineering elements?
Great. Hi, everyone. Just so some of you have some background on what the GSMA is and what I do, the GSMA is a trade association representing the interests of mobile network operators worldwide. So we have about 800 members across 200 countries. Obviously, very different laws in those countries. Some have privacy laws in place, some have privacy and telco regulations with similar requirements. Some just have telco requirements, maybe some security requirements or license obligation. It's a bit all over the place, although we are seeing a bit more convergence recently. The GSMA has been trying to develop some baseline best practices and principles on privacy for several years. In 2011, we developed mobile privacy principles, which are basically a reflection of the FIPS. We saw that as a baseline set of practices for mobile network operators and also recommendations for the larger global mobile ecosystem. We also tried to put those principles into practice through a privacy design guidelines for mobile app developers document. So that gets more to sort of the step-by-step implementation, privacy by design, thinking through what some of the risks are. That was in 2012. And we've still been looking at a number of issues and how to improve privacy across the mobile ecosystem. As we see the proliferation of global privacy laws, both new laws and also revised laws, we've been getting more requests from our members on assistance for how to respond to them. So sometimes it's a consultation response, and they're not entirely sure what to say. They want to know what the industry position is, because of course they're also interested in global convergence to make their lives easier. And in some cases, they get sought out by governments specifically to provide feedback, and they want to do that in a real way. There's only so much we can do with our privacy team in London, and sometimes the laws are actually in languages where we don't have anyone who can quickly review it. So we thought, okay, we really need to develop a tool that we can give them so that they can interpret these laws and they can provide feedback in a real, tangible way. So we developed this smart privacy report. We'd been advocating for the development of horizontal privacy laws for a while, but the report goes into more detail about what the right kind of privacy framework actually looks like. So there's an emphasis on a risk-based approach, on horizontal privacy frameworks, on privacy by design. But one of the biggest elements in it is this focus on accountability, which is something we talked about with the members for a long time. But we took more steps to talk about what accountability means in practice. Now, this is a more high-level approach than what's in the NIST framework in terms of steps, but we did get into some of the points about communicating policies across the organization and getting top-level buy-in. Really, our focus was on that question of how do you embed a culture of privacy across an organization. So we took some steps to map that out. But it's not as detailed as NIST, and I see the NIST framework as a helpful complement to that, because actually, when we put the Smart Privacy Report out, actually when we were drafting it, there were some new legislative proposals coming out in countries where they'd never seen privacy legislation before. And the members were saying, okay, that's great. I know it needs to be risk-based. I know it needs to be horizontal, but what do I do? And I would answer in this sort of lawyer public policy way about engaging in governments. And they're like, no. What do I do with the data? And then I think, oh, okay, you're talking about like starting with data mapping. And so I actually started to draft something which was like, you know, a baby framework, like, okay, here's a checklist of what you have to do now that, you know, congratulations, you have a privacy law, now what, like a starter pack. And luckily, the NIST framework has come, and I feel like I don't have to do that now. And granted, you know, this isn't something that we would do in a mandatory way. This is a voluntary thing that will help people get on the right track. And I will say, usually people were on the right track already with things like data mapping and inventory, because telcos have been regulated for so long. They're used to a certain amount of regulation and compliance, but they wanted help with privacy specifically. So I think this is really helpful. Also, you know, the people that are working on implementing privacy controls in organizations aren't always the same, as you know. You know, it can be a legal team, it can be a cybersecurity team, it could be the IT team. So I think having something where whoever it is can pick it up and look at it and understand it is really helpful, because I've definitely had discussions with small operators in small countries where it's the IT team, you know, that's putting this in, and they have a very different way of talking about how to put controls in place than the legal team. And many people are familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework and see that as a useful tool. So I think that the crosswalk between the two is particularly helpful, and makes this more understandable for folks. So, you know, I look forward to being able to recommend the NIST framework for people just starting out, the same way that I recommend the NIST cybersecurity framework. And then maybe some Linden Go cards as well. So maybe that's a useful tool to hand over as well. But yeah, I look forward to its use in the future.
Thank you so much, Jade. I just love the congrats, you have a privacy law, now what? I think it's such a helpful reminder for everyone in this room that is so often so deep on these issues that it really is important to focus and discuss how we can help folks operationalize this, you know, from the top level to as deep in the weeds as we need to go. So thank you for your thoughts on that. And so now I want to turn now to Stan to help bring us back to the individual, which is where Naomi started in some of her comments about the focus and whose risk and whose problematic, you know, actions we are, or who is experiencing the problematic actions that the NIST framework is looking to address. So as we know, the NIST Privacy Framework is designed to be implemented by organizations and to help them, as Naomi said, internalize the privacy impacts on individuals so that they can better address them. But the benefits, of course, are meant to accrue to individuals. So given your background, Stan, in machine learning and AI, I wondered if you could shed light on how organizations could, in your view, use the framework to address emerging technologies, as well as your thoughts on, you know, whether and how you see this framework benefiting individuals.
Sure, thank you. I will start by saying a few words about CDT. CDT is a advocacy-based organization that promotes laws and policies that ensure that human rights and civil liberties extend not just to our lives online, but also the digital world we all interface with. I'm also here on behalf of a related group, the Governance, Research, and AI Leadership Network, GRAIL. This is a new network started by CDT and the R Street Institute. The idea is to bring the legal expertise of researchers, law professors, and other sort of social scientists and academics working on the edges of machine learning and other emerging technologies, and bring them into policymaking discussions as they happen, so that we hope more informed policy discussions will result in better policies. So now turning to your question, as you said, the NIST framework is intended to sort of convey benefits both to organizations as they gear up for compliance, but also to individuals ultimately. And I think the framework can help with that in two ways. The first way is through sort of communication and transparency. This provides an opportunity for organizations to systematically communicate to their customers what they're doing to protect their data. And in doing so, it conveys a second benefit, which is an opportunity to build and assess trust from the individual perspective. It's often hard to know what's happening sort of on the other side of the interface that you may provide some data through. And so to the extent that companies and organizations can upfront say to you, here's what we're doing. We have this system, we have this process in place. That is one metric by which we as individuals can say, I understand a little bit more now about what's happening. And so that's the overall perspective is that it's an opportunity to build trust in the relationship. In the machine learning context, I think it does that in sort of two different pathways. The first is the sort of development and training of machine learning and automated decision systems. And so those are often built on huge corpora of data, often sort of gathered from all of us as individuals. And so the framework provides an opportunity, and again, I'll keep saying opportunity because it's a brand new framework, right? We all have things to look forward to there. But it builds in the ability sort of in the front end for either the consumer to say, no, thank you, I would rather not be part of this database, or to have the trust to say, yes, go ahead and use my data to build this model, which, you know, depending on whether they do de-identification techniques or sort of selective removal, you can do one or the other. But just that choice up front, to me, provides an indicator of trust. And the trust that that data will be used responsibly based on sort of the interaction up to that point, right? You've provided transparency. You've said, here's what we're doing with the data. Here's how we'll use it to build the model. On the second end of machine learning, the sort of input and output of the completed model, again, it's an opportunity to provide visible evidence of data minimization. So as your model may require one particular piece of information, through the framework and mapping and risk assessment, you can say, we really only need this one piece of data, and we don't need to collect 9 other data points to implement the system. And so that, again, can be conveyed through the framework and through steps taken as a result to give consumers another indicator of trust. I know it specifically also has some provisions indicating, well, to provide opportunities for bias testing and mitigation. And so this is one more sort of critical part of not only building the training sets, but also testing the model afterwards. So from the consumer perspective, again, all of this framework guarantees, it can guarantee greater benefits when it is overlaid with the cybersecurity framework, because it's not only about what you're doing with the data, which is the sort of privacy side, but also what you're doing to protect that data from accidental breaches and other harmful data uses. And so I would encourage all organizations who are either already implementing the cybersecurity framework or looking forward to implementing the privacy framework to do both. Thank you.
So much. That's really helpful. And you know, touching on some of the very concrete ways that the framework can help with these emerging technologies. Naomi and I were chatting just before this section about the changes between the last version and this latest version, and looking at the new control that stakeholder preferences are included in algorithmic objectives, and importantly, the outputs are evaluated against those preferences. And I think that speaks to some of what you're addressing there. Naomi, I wondered if you had any comments or Stan, further thoughts on that?
So I have further questions on that, if I can pose one to Naomi. I know that NIST is working on standards for artificial intelligence right now, and I'm curious whether you see sort of a way to integrate both the privacy and the cybersecurity frameworks into whatever standards may result from your ongoing efforts there.
Yes, that's a great question. And, you know, it is a ongoing question and discussion at NIST as to, you know, this proliferation of frameworks, and we need to, you know, integrate them exactly as you say, and you know, simplify our approach to them. And I think this is a very good opportunity as we, you know, start out on this process to develop more standards around AI to bring those together. So I think that will definitely be work. You know, one thing that I could mention is that another concept that we borrowed from the cybersecurity framework was the idea of this companion roadmap. And so we also have released a roadmap with some of the areas where we see some key challenges ahead, and emerging technologies like AI is absolutely one of them. And you know, how are we going to get the more standards, and even some of the very foundational concepts? Because you know, I'll confess, I think we were a little forward-leaning with some of our you know, some of our outcomes around AI, around as you were mentioning, sort of evaluating bias in data, inputs and outputs. And, you know, the question sort of arises, well, what is bias? How do we define it? How do we evaluate it? What's a relationship to fairness? Because they're not exactly the same. And those are, in fact, issues that we are going to be grappling with. We're looking to have a workshop on bias later this year, so stay tuned. But you know, I echo and affirm that these are areas that we need to work on.
I'll just add, so I'm also Deputy General Counsel at CDT, and as part of our compliance efforts, I strongly appreciate the high degree of overlap between cybersecurity and privacy frameworks. That makes my job easier, right? It is easier to do both at the same time because they're so well matched. Thank you.
So sticking with the requests of our hosts here at CPDP, certainly I have plenty of other questions, but I want to open it up to the floor. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Actually, there's a mic here I see in the middle, so come on up to the mic. Do we have any questions? All right, well, I'll let you think about those a little bit more. It is early in the morning. And maybe toss one question that I have to admit I have a particular interest in, so I'm happy to kind of turn to it while you all think and pull up a slide. You know, I've given away my bias, which is IAPP's mission and focus on the privacy workforce, which has come up a lot now. And we started following NIST work in this regard from the inception of the framework development, including because of their focus on kind of bringing together the different segments of the privacy workforce and trying to forge conversations and collaboration between them. And so from both our own membership numbers and some of our survey work, we know that, you know, while the privacy profession was originally primarily lawyers, today lawyers make up less than half of our 52,000 members. And this, I pulled up a slide from our this year's governance report showing the kind of breakdown of where privacy professionals sit within an organization. So we know that, today more and more it includes engineers, it includes product developers, designers, business managers, security, HR, marketing, you name it. And so one thing that our organization has tried to do to help forge these conversations is we've mapped, albeit an earlier version of NIST Privacy Framework to our Certified Information Privacy Management certification to try to understand the skill set that privacy professionals need to implement something like the NIST framework. But I would love to get the group's thoughts on, how each of you or any of you see the NIST framework being used as NIST envisions across an organization to help folks grapple with privacy questions and risks when they are coming from such different backgrounds, be it marketing or security or software development or legal. So can someone kick us off with some thoughts on that question? Naomi, can I turn to you?
Yeah, I can start. This was a big part of the conversation over the past year of development, because I remember at our second workshop where we sort of had a discussion draft, and some people came into the room who I would say generally had more of like a policy legal background, and they're like, this doesn't look anything like the way I talk about privacy and programs. And meanwhile, sort of the more technical security engineering folks were like, this is great. And so we're like, I think we need to do more to bridge this because, our goal was to make this a communication tool. And so it couldn't just be for, one group, even if, that group has been in the minority, which, and need more help, that's great. But still, it has to be a bridge. And so, through the iterations on it, we, while we, really wanted it to be organized around sort of, to align with the system and, system development and business processes that organizations use, rather than per se around, the fair information practice principles. Those are important, right? And that's an important way that policy and legal people talk. And so we really worked harder to sort of embed those principles into the categories and say, hey, these are ways to achieve them. As we get into these activities and outcomes, even though these are intended, we've sort of shifted it in terms of sort of aligning with system development and business processes. So, there may be more work to be done there, and that is why I say it's a living document, but that was certainly our goal.
I was in that room, so I just want to second how I'm using those conversations where it very much seemed like Naomi had poked the bear, and she was achieving the goal of forging conversations just because everyone was really waving it around and saying, wait, what? It was great, though. Jade, I wondered if I could turn to you because you highlighted for us just the challenges that organizations face grappling with so many laws from around the world when you are focused on the regulation and the compliance. Does turning this more into controls, the type of controls security professionals are familiar with, help address the challenge of, just legal nuances between jurisdictions?
Yes, I think one of the really helpful elements is that the framework is designed to be jurisdictionally agnostic and not in legalese. And a couple of people picked up on the fact that this is about mitigating adverse impact on individuals. So obviously the use of the data is a factor, but I think that this goes to mitigating those real acute privacy pains that people have. If you put the controls in place, you are less likely to have a data breach, which is usually the most tangible privacy harm that people feel, that they experience. It creates a headache at the least. And I think that makes this understandable and digestible for people across an organization. You know, no one wants to experience that. Everyone has had some experience, regardless of whether you're a privacy professional or not. You've experienced either trying to protect yourself from some sort of breach, or you've already experienced a breach. So I think, you know, tying it to that practical issue is something that's useful. And I think putting the responsibility on everyone in the organization is helpful. And I think in security, we've seen that because people have become more used to a mandatory security educational process when they get onboarded for a job, for example. I think with the GDPR in Europe, you're seeing that more with privacy. But I think if you have an easy to understand set of tools, so even if they're not putting controls in place, they understand why the controls are there. I think that's useful. You can develop that into, again, like an HR onboarding tool so people are more aware of how their data practices, how they treat data across the organization impacts other employees and impacts customers, other individuals. It has to all be more tangible, and I think that this helps with that. And I think it's also imperative that it initiates a multi-stakeholder discussion across an organization because even at the GSMA with projects that we've worked on, I tend to be kind of annoying and bring up privacy issues with a lot of things, you know, just to make sure that there's not a privacy issue, there's not an ethical issue. But by doing that, everyone has become more comfortable with talking about what the privacy issues are, what the ethical issues are, and we've gotten more input from data scientists, for example, on, you know, the level of anonymity in an anonymous data set, for example. You know, everyone feels more comfortable when you make talking about privacy a regularized thing, and it's important.
Thank you so much. I see we have a question. Please go ahead.
Hello, Tiago from the ADPS. I am trainee there with Massimo, by the way. My question, I've been watching the panel, and it's very nice to see all these initiatives that are supporting the privacy engineering community, especially in the sense of helping on compliance, developing toolkits and everything. I'm also curious to know if any of your organizations are also thinking about developing materials that can help on boost the privacy engineering market, so bringing innovation to these markets, because we know there are many privacy-enhancing technologies that are being studied and discussed, trying to be developed, but I'm still not sure how much the community is aware of these tools and how they could try to integrate them together to build something new.
I'm happy to jump in first. So at NIST, we are doing a couple of things. So last year, we launched a privacy engineering collaboration space. So it's a online platform. We use GitHub, actually. And you know, we see it as a place for practitioners to come and you know, submit and comment and work on improved tools. And so we have two focus areas at the moment. One is de-identification, and the other is privacy risk assessment. So we have a number of tools in there on de-identification, and so we certainly encourage people to use it and engage in it, and submit more tools and comment on them. And so we actually, you know, hope that will be sort of a seed for, you know, for that we can, you know, map to the framework in terms of, hey, you're trying to do activities, say, around de-identification. What's out there to help me do that? Secondly, we have the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, and we were actually doing more with privacy in there. And so there, the idea is commercial vendors come and do builds, right, to address a particular challenge. And then we're able to do these practice guides to show, hey, how did we put all these different products together to come to, a particular solution. And there too, we've been starting to integrate privacy, and again, hope that the privacy framework will be able to be integrated in there. But for example, we did a build with mobile device security, where, if organizations are bringing personal devices in, for employees, certainly, obviously, they looked at the cybersecurity question, but we also came in to help look at what are some of the privacy risks with bringing in your personal devices, and, what are some of the solutions to manage those risks.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, sorry. When we get granular, we tend to do it on a sort of sector-specific basis. And in this case, I'm talking about IoT, for example. We have IoT security guidelines, which have privacy and cybersecurity controls, mostly security controls, though. But we also last year did a paper on techniques for enhancing privacy in the IoT space, which did get into, at a high level, got into things like differential privacy and anonymization techniques. That was to sort of get people on the right track rather than a more formal framework. But of course, that's usually how that kind of thing starts, is with a higher level document. We also have Mobile Money Code of Conduct for Privacy and Cybersecurity, which has some controls that could be engineered. And we try to highlight different different sort of players in the ecosystem at some of the conferences. I would say that's probably one of the best things that we can do, is give people an opportunity to describe what they're doing at Mobile World Congress and at the other related events.
Massimo, yeah?
Yeah, just to add that, of course, we are not a private organization. We are not even policy makers within the public administration. We are supervisors. But we believe that's absolutely important. We want to boost that. That's why in the latest IPEN workshops, for example, we invite people, to bring the state of the art. The state of the art is what is in the market at the end, what could be set to the market at the end of the day. That's absolutely outstanding as an important. And also our next IPEN workshop on the 3rd of June in Lisbon, we want to have it as, as an opportunity to highlight the state of the art. We also couple with other initiatives lately, just also to raise awareness on that. We're looking at certain elements like smart assistants that are on the, objects that are on the market out there, and making an assessment under the data protection point of view. We call them tech dispatches, these kind of things. It's recent publications that we just to briefly like.
Yeah, so also from a more academic perspective, there are some initiatives to gather some tools or some privacy knowledge. Of course, it's impossible to have one big repository. I'm seeing Jaap Henk sitting there, so I'm thinking about the privacy patterns collection, which is available online, but there are certainly other initiatives that are freely available as well.
You've hit a nerve. Stan, was there anything you wanted to jump in here?
I don't know if this goes to the scale of engineering that your question put, but so CDT is a very small organization, but we still try to practice what we preach, right? And so as council tasked with compliance with both GDPR and CCPA, one thing I would like to build to use internally is a sort of simplified decision tree that integrates the framework, but addresses both GDPR and CCPA in a way that every person at CDT can say, oh, I have a step-by-step process for thinking about whether I need to collect this data, right? We collect and use data for our fundraising efforts. We're a charity organization. And so as a small tool, I can also see other derivative products being spun out, whether that's sort of an application or something else that organizations elsewhere can use a systematic and centralized sort of tool or tool set building off the framework to target specific or specialized sort of data uses.
Well, and let me just mention the IAPP 2 years ago launched privacy engineering section. Naomi was on our first board. Had other members of the audience were as well, and we're so grateful for the support. And what the privacy engineering section at the IAPP aims to do is kind of give a boost to the more general privacy engineering landscape, but including privacy engineering technologies by hosting forums on privacy engineering alongside our conferences, organizing kind of free and public meetups of privacy engineers, and really just promoting privacy engineering content. So if there are particular pets that we should draw attention to, we love to just point to folks' articles about them or announcements and the like, in our content and through our panels. So I'll mention that. Looking at the time, I have one last question I can give the panel here, or if there are any other questions in the audience, please jump up.
Just to compliment, thanks for everyone. It was not as a criticism, the question is just because it was a curiosity. And it's very nice to see that all stakeholders have been involved in also thinking that this is not only about challenges, but also about opportunities. Okay, thanks.
All right, so I want to kind of close by bringing us back full circle, back to the title of this session. What kind of foundation is needed to help organizations operate in a rapidly changing global technology and policy landscape? So I'd love your thoughts on that, but also not only on the opportunities, but also, thank you, not only on the opportunities, but the challenges. So is the framework a good contribution for building the foundations here? And where do you see potential challenges? I wonder, Stan, if I can start with you, since this is designed to help individuals ultimately. Any thoughts on that question?
Sure. I'm impressed with the framework, and as I said, I appreciate that it overlaps with the cybersecurity framework as well. In terms of challenges, I think the biggest one would be multiple divergent approaches to either the same goal, which is privacy protection, or slightly different goals, in that it may make frameworks more difficult to align from a sort of organizational perspective, whereas it would be nice to have one foundational tool to build on to achieve all the other goals down the road. So I hope that as other jurisdictions approach privacy, they will align as closely as they can with the risk-based approach, which, that's my perspective.
So much. Maybe we can kind of go down the line with 1 minute of your thoughts on the opportunities in either challenges or areas for future work on the NIST framework or other areas. Jade?
I think that, I've talked a lot about the different opportunities for clarifying requirements and, again, embedding that culture of privacy in different ways. I think the challenges seem like things that you're tackling in the processes that you're working on now, in terms of exploring issues like algorithmic transparency and bias issues. And those, I think that's only going to become more complicated. That and the de-identification question is going to be difficult, I think. As computing power increases, I think it's going to be challenging to tackle that issue. I mean, at a baseline, sometimes when you talk to people who are privacy aware at a low level, like for example in Europe, a lot of people know about the GDPR, and they'll say, oh, this database doesn't have personal data, don't worry about it. And they mean it doesn't have a name or a phone number. They don't realize that you can still piece this data together, that it's actually pseudonymized. And I think little basic things like that are still going to be some of the most challenging things to deal with. So there's de-identification in the larger sense, that some of these data sets that are out there in the public domain could be re-identified. But then there's, at the very basic level, still a lot of misunderstanding because people have a cursory grasp of privacy and think that that's enough. But I do think the framework can help make understanding a little bit better and bring more awareness.
Massimo?
Well, I mean, the main challenges of every framework is adoption. It's because the framework is something which is structured, which has a layer of abstraction. So I think that the challenge will be indeed having, these customized implementations, because I understand that the framework is flexible. You can plug in different things. So it's a sort of foundation once again. Of course, that's not enough for privacy engineering, but that's not a criticism because the NIST has other deliverables for that. So at the end of the day, that it's the real foundation, what lays behind, but then the single expertise, including the the engineering expertise, the ability of translating the requirements into then services and products that protect people and their data, that's a specific ability that needs to be developed on its own.
So we often see that doing privacy or privacy by design is still being done in isolation in different departments. In addition, you mentioned it before, there's a mismatch in terminology, in concepts. The legal people talk about different things and do an analysis in a different way than the technical people would do. So I think the framework is really helpful because it's pushed from the top, from the organization. It provides some guidelines in terminology, in spreading it through the organization. So I think that's great, setting that foundation. And I agree with Jay that one of the challenges is indeed getting the basics out there, and also getting the terminology straight across the different departments. So I think those will be some main challenges.
Last thoughts, Naomi?
Thank you. I think it's important is that, we've never looked at these frameworks as, a way to supplant what anybody is doing, right? And so, but really to, help organizations communicate. And so, when I hear that, organizations wanted to know more about how to do the threat modeling because they like it and they use it, what I'm excited about is, working with everyone to sort of, put those crosswalks together so that people who like and are, having success with Linden can, find that sort of cross point and then be able perhaps to communicate with other organizations better who maybe are using, I don't know, like the NIST Privacy Risk Assessment methodology, right? Like how, everybody should be able to continue to use the things that are working for them, but, as a discipline, we need to be able to sort of, coalesce around this communication. And so, that's work that, we were doing with Yap Hank and others, and I'm looking forward to continuing that with everyone.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in thanking our panelists. You're welcome.